This prayer is called, Teach me to perform every work only to please Thee. Father, teach me to perform all my work only to please Thee. Let me feel Thee as the electricity of life, moving the machinery of my bones, nerves, and muscles. In every heartthrob, every breath, every burst of vital activity, teach me to feel Thy power. Om. Peace. So I don't have a joke this morning, but I thought we could tense and relax. So let's do it together. Focus on the heart, tense. One more, shrugging the shoulders. Relax the shoulders down. Relax the heart for a moment. I invite you to close the eyes and feel receptivity in the heart, offering anything that's blocking the heart, any tensions, ours or not ours, just offering it up. You can open your eyes. So this topic is abiding in God. And for some, the word God can be scary even when we're on the path, because it has this sort of feeling or remnant of churchianity, if you will. But there's so many ways to understand what it means to abide in God. And we can think of it, if we're going by the definition, to accept or act in accordance with. So in this case, we're talking about the ability to act in accordance with a higher intelligence, to act in accordance to love, or to make guidance, to accept guidance by that wisdom or love, and to make it our pole star and let every action and every feeling be guided from that light. And so we can just pose it in a different way when we think of abiding in God, and it's how do we live and act from a consciousness of love or of unity. Nayaswami Padma wrote a book recently, Hints of Laughter, Hints of Joy, and she was describing Swami Kriyananda, and she said, he had a consciousness of unity. He abided in God, and she was able to witness that through this consciousness of, being the unifying element in the room. And so how do we get to live in attunement like Swami Kriyananda, for example? And so there's many ways to think about attunement or talk about it, but we'll practice or focus a little on practices that help our receptivity, because we're not trying to create anything. Just as I think we talked about with Sri Yukteswar, talking about the natural love in the heart, we're not needing to find a love somewhere. We're needing to just simply bring it out of ourselves. It's already naturally there. And how do we become receptive to that universal and divine love? And receptivity really comes from our willingness and our readiness. In this case, the willingness and readiness to receive the fullness of what God can give us. And so how do we become more receptive? These two things, our willingness and our readiness, they kind of take shape over lifetimes of failing massively. And not failing in a material sense, but finding that we're not finding the joy that we're seeking, when we don't find the love that we're seeking, when we keep hitting those walls, it's then that something breaks in our consciousness and says, hey, wait a minute, maybe I'm doing something wrong here. And so the little light, starts to come in. And in fact, if we I just had this thought that if we think about everything in our lives that was fulfilling, that was joyous, that had purpose, if we really look at those moments, we realize we had nothing to do with it. There was something larger at play. And we start to understand that, that living in that consciousness of unity, of love, it happens when we're out of the way. When it has, when we have nothing to do with the equation, we're just participants, we're cooperating with this flow of energy. And so, how do we get out of the way? That's something that we talk a lot about in our satsangs. And there's a solution that can become a mantra, at least it's become one for me, and it's think of others, serve others. The best way to get out of the way is to stop thinking about ourselves. And it can be in the most mundane of things or the simplest of things, but I was thinking about, last week we were at Spiritual Renewal, and it's a big social time. And, some of us identify as introverts, and so we have our limits on social engagements. And one of my friends was commenting, like, I would love to be more social, but, I'd rather basically go hide in a cave. And I thought, yeah, that's most of us yogis with those samskars. We just would prefer to meditate in a cave all day. But, I told her, and she was receptive. She was actually asking for advice, like, how do I engage more? How do I, break out of this self-definition of I'm an introvert? And I said, well, think of others. Stop thinking of yourself. And it sounds kind of in your face, but it's true. If we are thinking about, and I know this happens to me all the time, oh, how awkward I'm being, in this group situation, or, I wonder what that person thinks of me, and, oh, I wonder if they like that I said this, or, oh, what am I wearing? And we're constantly focused on ourselves, then we completely miss the opportunity to be of service to others. And it's almost like the moment that you tell the infinite that I'm willing to be a channel for someone else, and I stop thinking of myself, but I'm willing to be a channel, it's almost like, the infinite goes, oh, okay, and, opens the floodgate. But we stop the floodgate when we're focused on us. And so even in this really simple scenario where she's like, I'm socially awkward, I'm like, no, you're just thinking about yourself. And it's a big thing. I think it's a big, one of the things that we can practice it every single day. We can, for example, be in a line at the grocery store. We can see someone who's clearly down or kind of in themselves, and we have the opportunity to share light. And if we're sharing light, then that's what is flowing through us. That's what we are abiding in. That's what we're tuning into. And one time I was talking to Nayaswami Shanti about this. It was one of the few times where, there's like a Nayaswami or someone for spiritual guidance, in an opportunity to talk. And I actually was pretty jazzed about how I was doing. And I was like, you know what? My breakdowns are less and less. And she's like, oh, that's great, And she says, what's going on? And I said, well, I realize that at the end of every sort of spiral of negativity or something, at the end, if I follow that train of thought all the way to the end, the thought is, what about me? If I'm upset about the way something isn't working, if I don't like what someone else is doing, the end thought behind it all that's causing all this chaos in my heart is, what about me? And I'm learning to, I was sharing with her, I'm learning to, the moment that I want to go there, to just make it a practice to just stop. I don't need to understand why I'm there. I'm just there, and just start serving someone in some small way. It could be, like Dharana this morning wasn't feeling well, and he took the time to iron my thing, which is all wrinkly now. But, just finding ways to get out of yourself so that you don't stay stuck in why me or poor me. And she said something really interesting. She said, if you just worked on this one thing, then you would make so much more progress than most people make in a lifetime. She said that awareness is so huge. She said, don't make that a small thing. She said, it's a very big deal that you have the awareness that it's not about you, is more spiritual progress than some people make in a lifetime. And so that was really telling to me, that when we don't know our way forward, serve. That's the easiest way to get moving. And there was a period of time where it's a sign when we're plagued by anxiety, when we have fear, when we're struggling with grief, with anger, those should be red flags that we're really, and not to diminish the experience, but we're really being preoccupied with ourselves. And there was a period of time where I noticed that my default when I woke up was not cheerful. It was quite the opposite. And if I really went into it, there was just like this pool of grief. And I was just thinking, what is it? Like, I want to be joyful. I want to live inspired. And this thing is dragging me down. And I was trying to understand it too much. And I had the good fortune of talking to a very wise man. And he said, in essence, he told me, if you serve the poorest of the poor, you will never cry again. And I was like, whoa. It really stopped to make me think, what am I doing? Call it what you will, some past karma, victimization, self-pity, it doesn't really matter what it is and why it's there. The moment there's the awareness that it's there and the intention to get out of that, to live, to abide in God, to live in joy, to live in peace, to live in love, the moment we just have that intention, it's just a matter of deciding to shift. And in this case, the most practical way to do that was to stop concentrating on myself. And like Nayaswami Roma said in SRW, stop feeling. Stop putting so much attention to how I feel and just focus more on uplifting and inspiring others. And he said, you will never cry again. So I was reading this beautiful quote that really summarizes and encapsulates that in the journey to self-realization. Master says the highest commandments given to man are to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And secondly, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so if you want to abide in God, love your neighbor. It's really what this reading gives us an opportunity to reflect on. And, kind of hand in hand with service or karma yoga is the idea of just moving the energy. Davy, in a tea with Dharna and I once said, get people to serve, inspire them to serve. And she said, it's dangerous when people aren't serving. And we've observed it in ourselves most of all. I was actually just reflecting. Dharna was pointing out that we've had a lot of downtime. And if I look at it, it correlates with some moodiness. I'm like, okay, I've been too much in myself. It's time to get that energy moving. It's time to serve. When we aren't serving and focused on others, we start ruminating. And it just perpetuates and deepens the grooves of those thought patterns that get us into trouble. And so we saw this really clearly with one of our kids. She was going through this rut of really like just the epitome of, teenage angst. And valid, sure, in and of itself. We have the right to that experience, but we were trying to show her how to move past that. And so we just worked on the premise that let's just move the energy. And so we got her to go with me every day, to go hiking, to go running, and it took off. She did that just for 2 weeks, and then when she went back home, she was doing it on her own. And then she got that contrast of, well, I don't want to go back to feeling that way. I'd rather feel this way. And it was just about moving the energy. She's not going to call it abiding in God, but that's what she's moving closer to. By moving the energy and being willing to do something instead of getting stuck and spiraling down, she's moving closer towards joy, towards being lighter. She was lighter. She's a whole different person. And really, it's the same thing. Whether we call it abiding in God, there's a whole spectrum of that. But in essence, it's learning to live in joy and in light. And lastly, we've came up with this fun phrase. Many of us are, our whole spiritual journey is getting rid of our self-definitions. And so we thought, what if we instead practice our cosmic definition, our cosmic self-definition? Because that's another red flag. I think we were talking about this at our barbecue. Someone was saying how it's tricky because we want to respect our wants and we want to respect our likes, and I don't do this way, I like that way. But that also blocks the flow of energy. And so it should be a flag in us anytime we're saying I, because that I want, those certain desires or attachments or likes and dislikes, they don't want to be looked at and they don't want to be questioned. So if you're protecting something, it's a red flag to reflect on, maybe extricating yourself a little from that definition and looking at it. And again, it all helps to what does that have to do with attunement? If we are, again, in the little self, then we're not abiding in the big self. And our self-definitions is one way that we get caught in the little self. So continuously freeing ourselves from our self-definitions, our little self, and appealing more to our big cosmic self and trying to understand more and more what that cosmic self is. And so receptivity, the opening of our heart, and constantly offering our thoughts to that higher consciousness is actually devotion. So it's very interesting because abiding in God in the same way as the word devotion can seem very religious, but we can reframe it to thinking about devotion as our effort and our energy directed toward living in the light, meaning living in joy or living in peace or calmness or love, and keeping that love flowing through sharing it with others. And so devotion is just, by practicing all these things, by practicing serving others, by practicing getting out of our self-definitions, we are dedicating more energy to our light, and that is devotion. It's nothing super religious or esoteric. It's the commitment of your energy in a certain direction, and that direction in this case is upwards, is in the light, is in love. And I'll just close by sharing another story that with Nayaswami Shanti. She was speaking to a devotee in her community, and I can't remember if it was, from some sort of medical procedure or something happened, an accident, but they said, I was in so much pain. I feel really bad now because I completely forgot about God. And she says, the fact that you remember God now means that he was always there. And I just thought that was a beautiful reminder. We can forget to be in the light. We can forget the masters. We can forget our gurus sometimes. We can forget that we want to share, God and and live in his presence. But the fact that we are here, the fact that we come back to it again and again means that his presence is always there. And it's just, like in meditation, coming back, recentering, coming back. But it's just, like that metaphor that we use in discipleship, God's light, the infinite intelligence, love, it's always there. And we are simply opening our hearts to receive it. God bless you.